Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today in this webinar series. This is hosted by the Freight Mobility Research Institute and the WTS FAU student chapter. My name is Aline Machado, and I will be the moderator as the president of WTS at FAU, along with Valentina Facuzzi as the vice president of the student chapter. Valentina, say hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Valentina Facuzzi, vice president of WTS.
So she will be taking the questions in the end of the presentation, and you may either type in the chat box or speak, but just hold it to the end. And today we have the pleasure to have Ms. Lori Treviranus presenting on the state of mobility and industry from the private sector perspective. She is the Vice President of Transportation at Keith, with over 19 years of experience in civil engineering, providing the highest quality infrastructure and facility solutions to transportation agencies, local governments, private developers, and institutional clients. Thank you, Lori, for your time, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. I will go ahead and share my presentation. You can let me know when you can see the screen.
We can see it.
Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. Keith is happy to speak on this subject because we feel like everyone's living and breathing this current pandemic and thinking, how is this going to handle and change our future? So as part of this presentation, we went around and chatted amongst all the leadership at our company and all the various sectors that we perform in, just to kind of get a pulse of where each of the various sectors are. And one of the overriding principles that everybody kind of felt was that, a pandemic will have forever impacts on the world. Things won't be the same. And as a society, we tend to mark these times in our history and catastrophes, but move forward. So we know that this is going to cause a change to society, but we know as a society, we will move forward. It may just change how we interact and how we move, but we all will move forward at the end of the day. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Lori Treviranus, and I am the Vice President of Transportation for Keith. I am born and raised here in Florida. That picture on the left was myself. I grew up on a construction site. My dad was in heavy construction, so my sister and I spent nights and weekends on the job site, so that's us on my dad's front-end loader. And then I attended the University of Florida, and I was in the marching band while I was there. So that's me at the Magic Kingdom performing while we were there. And now here I am at Keith. And as you mentioned, 19 years in my career so far. So lived through a couple of other financial troubles and circumstances, and we kind of peppered that stuff in as well. But I just want to go forward from there. So I represent Keith. We are a company that has been around in South Florida for 6 decades, over 60 years. We have 5 offices: Pompano, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, West Palm, and Orlando. And we are a family-owned company. Our founder, Bill Keith, was born and raised in Miami, and then his daughter took over the company after he passed, and now her son has taken over and is our current president, Alex Lazowick. But we have been in South Florida for, like I said, over 60 years, seen a lot of things come and go, and used a lot of that information here to speak on today. This is some pictures of our founders here as we go through the times and our lives. And we have Bill Keith there and Dodie running on the left back in time. And then Dodie, our second president, surveyor, born and raised. And that's her in the center when she started her career and now currently. And then Alex Lazowick, our current president, that we found some fun younger picture of him as well there when he was learning and starting off his career. He started off in the survey crews and decided, he jokes about it, that crawling around the swamps was not a thing for him. So he decided to become an engineer. So Alex is our current president. The firm itself, over 170 people. This is a picture taken pre-COVID at one of our holiday gatherings, but fun group of people and a lot of great minds together to talk about what's happening in this world. Kind of our founding principles at Keith, we're a multidisciplinary firm, and projects being interconnected, right? It's not just a roadway project, it's not just a high rise. These projects are all connected and all contribute to the resilience of the community in general. We have 5 practice lines at the firm: access, that connects people, goods, and industries; campus, that gathering, creating environments for gathering. Facility is the establishment of the infrastructure, including the safety and support for the community. Life is creating stories and stages for everyday moments. And play is to create dynamic experiences to engage with each other and with the world around us. Thinking about the first practice line, as we said, I'm the Vice President of Transportation, and speaking, of course, to the freight group here is access is one of our main lines of work here. So the goal of an access project is to connect people with people, goods with people, industry with people. Thinking about one of the first places noticing changes is that port, right? Port Everglades, we've got a project there shown on the screen. This project's been underway for quite a while to establish new cargo handling container yards. And so, of course, there have been some impacts to the port industry and to Port Everglades in general, right? They were about 19 years into their deepening project, and we know that the port is not going to stop that now just because of COVID and the current pandemic. It may change some of how they proceed with it, but they will continue to proceed with the funding of that project because they're so far into it. That by deepening the port, that will allow them to become the new Savannah, right? Right now, because a lot of these ships can't get into Port Everglades, they have to continue up to Savannah and then unload. This will allow the ships that have come through the canal and get on ground earlier and faster, right? So some of the impacts that we've seen due to COVID, of course, are an increase in demand for the warehouse and storage areas there, right? People have changed the way they're obtaining goods and services, a lot more online ordering, which turns into a lot more of getting the product to people, right? So not only are you looking for new places to store it and distribute it, but you're also figuring out how are you going to complete that last mile of delivery. So a lot of what the port is experiencing is that they see such an increase in goods coming into the port, but they've got such funding issues due to the cruise sector shutdown, of course, right now. The nice thing about Port Everglades, of course, is their access to rails and highways rather than having to go up to Savannah and that other kind of more, a little more disconnected location. But we do see that they are continuing with their work at the port, and they recognized, again, this pandemic being a moment in history of our society, but knowing that it's all moving forward. So they're, of course, looking for how are they going to continue funding these things. They're not getting the passenger fees that they would have gotten with cruises, but that's part of their progress and planning as they move forward. But from our perspective, they are continuing to move their projects forward at the port. The next area, of course, is the airport, another way to get goods and people into our area and can maintain access to the community. We are on site doing construction management for the FLL T1 expansion out there. We have seen of course, we all saw the virtual shutdown of air travel that happened during COVID. The folks that we have on site at FLL, it's been a blessing, of course, in disguise, where when you have reduced passengers, you can ramp up and accelerate your construction, right? You don't have to do only night work. You can do a lot more work in the terminal during the day, so you can speed up a lot of your construction out there. In the recent past couple of months, we have seen an uptick in flights at FLL. People are starting to be more comfortable with traveling. Spirit Airlines has doubled their trips into FLL right now. We do think that this industry will be largely dependent on human comfort. When will people be comfortable flying again, right? That's when the airport's pausing and waiting a lot to see what are they going to do with it. The projects that are in development and in construction are moving forward. They have not put a stop on any of their projects so far. They recognize their funding issues, of course. They're not getting the passenger fees there as well. They were already seeing some funding issues prior to COVID because a lot of their funding came from the parking on site, right? But with the advent of Uber and Lyft coming in, they were already seeing some decrease in their funding due to that, but they were seeing an uptick in the charges that they could do with the ride share and of course with the passenger fees out there. Another new interesting culture that's happening with the airport, of course, will be that there's a new culture of wearing masks in public there and maintaining social distance. So this is going to be another issue that the airport will have to tackle as they continue to expand. It's probably a good thing, right? That you always used to fly and you'd end up getting sick after you flew, right? So it's probably a good thing that people are wearing masks and being careful. But They're having to consider spreading out seating more, allowing for space in bathrooms and such to be more spread out. But again, we're seeing that the airport, it has recognized that they need to continue to move forward, that society will return to air travel, that goods and services will still come into the airport and need to be removed from the airport. There have been talks that there was a bailout that expired in September, and there's talks about an additional bailout that will come as well. And a lot of the airlines are kind of holding their breath waiting for that to happen. But FLL itself has continued to maintain their projects moving forward. I tend to dabble in the DOT realm. That's where a lot of my work happens. This is from the highway perspective. I'm a highway designer by trade. And so, for example, one of our projects is in Hollywood, in the city of Hollywood. This is all pre-pandemic, but the goal of this project, and this is a lot of what the DOT is trying to do, is a lot of talk about complete streets, how to make them about more than just a vehicle, but completing the right streets, right? We aren't going to try when it's a certainly not on a limited access facility where you're going to have a lot of truck traffic and you're not going to see bike lanes put in there, right? But a lot of what we're trying to do is make these roads complete for all users. From the DOT's perspective, of course, they are seeing a funding loss happening right now. There has been a pause in all new acquisition for projects at the DOT while central office did some pretty hefty evaluations of their work programs. And they recognize that while they're not seeing commuters and travelers on the roads as much, they are seeing an increase in freight demand on their roadways. So a lot of what they're having to do is consider which projects they will advance. They have forecast it was about a $1.4 billion deficit over the next 5 years. And they actually then started looking out to see when they thought it would level back out again. It was looking at like 2029. Of course, the governor just signed an emergency action to supply some funding to compensate for that deficit with the DOT. So what the DOT has done, they're composed of 9 districts, essentially 7 districts, and then the Turnpike Enterprise and Central Office. Each district then has been allocated a certain funding amount. They've gone back and re-examined their 5-year work programs, and they're focusing more on maintenance and safety projects. So looking back and saying, instead of a new PD&E for a new study corridor, that they do need to maintain the roads. That's a huge focus of DOT, is making the roads rideable. And safety projects, of course, are about human life and safety. So those will stay moving on. We had, and I'm sure that there's been some talk in this group about the MCORs, those multi-corridor. They're more on the north end of the state, but this is the first time the state has constructed these new limited access facilities in quite a few years. Large dollar amounts were allocated to those MCORs funds. As of right now, those projects are staying on track. They have begun their design. We're, of course, just kind of waiting to see what's happening with their work programs as all of that has fallen out. Some of the districts, the North Florida districts, have gone back to DOT and have gotten their work programs approved. The South Florida districts are anticipating to have their work programs approved this week, so that'll be very exciting for the community when that happens. Of course, then too, when you think about transit out there, we're seeing decreased ridership in the transit, but then you have the counter to that with the Broward County surtax funds that are out there, that penny sales tax for transportation that was put into place a couple of years ago. And a lot of those initial projects were focused on transit. So the idea is that certainly they'll wait to see what's going to happen, but they think that people will resume and go to this, because in the ultimate condition, we still have traffic problems in South Florida. So there's still a focus on increasing transit facilities, and then hopefully we'll see an increase in ridership that once that happens. Then in our life sector, this is more of when we think about the private sector, private developers, et cetera. We are not seeing any slowdown in land development. From our perspective, the developers have a lot of money out there. The difference between now and 2008, when there was the last recession, was that it wasn't, a lot of developers just didn't have the money. So right now, the difference that we're seeing is that developers have money. They are using this term dry powder, where they have good money, but they are not sure they have good projects. So they're holding on to a lot of this money right now. But overall, the developers have not stopped any of their work. They all think that this is a blip and they need to be staying on top of projects and getting them out the door. Construction is continuing. They've all adapted and managed to keep their construction going with social distancing and mask guidelines in place. We are seeing in the entertainment sector, if you think about perhaps a casino. The idea might be that if they're going to redevelop, gaming is going to look different. Do we expand beyond gaming? Do we consider the need for carving off pieces of our property and selling them from more storage distribution sites? So we're seeing that happen in the private sector as well. They are also impacted by the gas tax. A lot of this, the funding for the land development will then go into the municipalities, right? Those fees they pay, impact fees, et cetera, go to the municipalities, but these gas tax issues trickle down to everybody. We are seeing some cool ideas coming out of this, and this is kind of where I urge students to be innovative and exciting, right? One of the neat things that our planning group is starting to hear about is how do you think about the things like malls. The malls were already not doing well before this pandemic happened, but one of the cool things that the planning community is talking about is converting malls to senior and affordable living, where you would already have a food court in there, and perhaps each store would become one or multi-family home, and it's a cool idea to think about. Other neat ways we're seeing people adapt and societies adapt is that new ways to gather are happening. Cities are having to adjust their regulations, for example, when they're allowing on-street parking spaces to be roped off and used for outdoor dining facilities. So everyone's kind of adapting to this new normal, and it's neat to watch this process happening. It's also neat to see these cities considering relaxing their regulations to allow society to continue to move forward in a way that they feel comfortable. Helps the businesses stay on track and stay open. So it's a nice symbiotic relationship, of course. What we were seeing prior to the pandemic was de-urbanization happening. And at the beginning of the pandemic, same thing. A lot of folks were moving out of the high density areas and moving into more suburban communities. We did find this graphic that says what happened during coronavirus, right? And there's a lot of factors that can go into play here. This could be a lot of folks just getting out of the areas that were hotspots early on in this. But we as a society in South Florida and our land development sector is seeing more folks moving into South Florida. So there's a need for homes, there's needs for infrastructure, for facilities. The other good thing that Florida has going for it is that we are a drive-to destination. So even our tourism industry has been able to survive. It's tough for them for sure. Hotels are seeing reduced stays. Disney is, of course, having fewer guests, but nonetheless staying alive through all of this. What we are seeing is that developers are using this time to buy land cheap. A lot of folks are selling their land. So the developers will buy the land at a good price. They'll ride out the tenant leases. And during that time, they can still move forward with the entitlements while their tenant is in the building. And then once that tenant lease is done, they can move forward with their redevelopment of that site. Overall, our land development group expects that South Florida still has 10 to 15 years of redevelopment before it has to continue to move forward significantly. But it's certainly not slowing down in any way. Our facility group, infrastructures that provide safety and support for the community out there. This includes things like emergency operations, police, water treatment, et cetera. Of course, these are all life safety items that are needed. You can't ever get away without these. The pause in people moving around with the quarantine, with the working from home, less commuting, has allowed a lot of these infrastructure projects to accelerate their schedules as well. For example, the Fort Lauderdale Police Headquarters out there that we're working on. What we all also are seeing is that there's talk about a new healthy accreditation. I'm sure everyone's heard of LEED certification. There's talk now about buildings that will look for a healthy accreditation that will say they've already adapted their HVAC systems and their facilities for public safety and social distancing and cleaner air, et cetera. We also are expecting to see impacts to capital improvement plan funding. That's a lot of the communities, municipalities, and what they'll be doing for their roadways, their utilities, et cetera. We recognize, of course, our feeling is that the public sector is very cautious. They aren't sure what their funding situation will be. And so they're all kind of waiting to see with the results of the election, and then as the pandemic continues and progresses, what's going to happen to their funding sources out there. Campus impacts have been very interesting, talking about how people will gather, whether this is to learn, to worship, to debate, to heal, etc. One of the root things that Keith's leadership and the folks that we talked about and kind of collaborated with ideas here is that humans by nature want to interact with humans. And we think that what will happen here is that we will be creating new spaces to gather in different ways. We may not see the college quad being shoulder to shoulder folks anymore. It may be a lot more spread out. This Broward College canopy tree idea is that we are working on a pilot project to plant new shade trees that will lead into more facilities for folks to study outdoors, to gather outdoors. But it's creating, again, this space where people can come together and feel safe. A lot of this too will come with the deurbanization that we talked about, people moving to Florida. We need more schools, so that's going to impact this idea with the campuses. Even with the introduction of hybrid learning, we will see that though it may end up with some portion of students at home and some portions on campus, those students on campus will need more space to social distance as well, continuing on. So we're seeing not only new buildings, new spaces, but adaptive reuse as well. So that's kind of the new normal that we see happening out there. And then play, the fifth line of our access line out there, our practice line, creating dynamic experiences for folks in general. Outdoor play has always been important to society, of course, but we think there will be a refocus on the outdoors now. Folks are going to rediscover parks and preserves as they try to gather and find their way back together. We, of course, see an increase in activity in parks, and are even seeing temporary structures like food trucks coming in as far as venues would be concerned out there. We are also seeing some pretty new ideas as far as hotels go, where you used to have a concert venue that everyone would be seated or standing together, and now we're seeing hotels consider building new areas that are kind of a U shape around a stage that's on the floor, and the balconies are your place where you sit and watch a concert. So just new ideas that are coming and new things we're seeing out there. But again, we aren't seeing any slowdown from the private sector's perspective. We're not seeing any kind of stop work orders. We're seeing continue ahead. And overall, we feel like this general feeling is that society is going to continue to move forward and just adapt. This adaptive reuse is a term that feels completely applicable to the situation. And then the other really exciting item in Florida that we have going for us, of course, is our spaceport. We have the area there, of course, Kennedy Space Center has now expanded and has included private sector on property. But Florida wants to be the premier commercial space hub. We want to be the central station of the world for going into space. The idea is that Florida is a great environment to launch your facility. You can land it because we're right by the water. You'll be able to take your product to and from. You can manufacture your rockets on site. You can then co-locate and have your facilities right there near the spaceport as well, and continue to collaborate. So what comes with having that spaceport, of course, is that you got getting from the nearest airport, if you're coming from Orlando, MCO, the nearest airport there, it's about a 45-minute road drive to get there. There are two roadways to get there. One is limited access and one is a 4-lane divided highway to get there. The DOT is talking about what upgrades will be necessary as they start ramping up the commute between the airport and the spaceport, upgrades to both of those roadway facilities. And then, of course, the train, Brightline, coming through. Brightline is under construction on that stretch. If you drive along it right now, you can see where the footprint of the train is going to go. But that will be connecting the spaceport to the Orlando airport as well. A lot of beyond just the idea of access to the port, then of course there are the folks that need to get there. This is going to be new jobs. There'll be more infrastructure required for those people who are living there and close there. But a lot of this interagency work is happening to continue to make Florida this future of the space industry as well. So it's another very exciting place to be, an exciting time in our world. And overall, we just, Keith, want to tell everyone, and certainly for the students on the line, we challenge you to continue to be adapting and look for ways to innovate. That's very exciting and important for everybody. And know that society in general wants to gather. People want to gather. They want to be together. That's going to continue to happen. Humans are resilient. So we think that you should definitely be excited about your career in the future and where you're going. There's a lot to continue to happen in South Florida, in all of Florida, and of course, in the world. So we thank you very much for the time and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Lori, for the presentation. It was interesting to see how Keith is being innovative with coming up with solutions from the COVID impacts. It looks like we don't have any questions at the moment, but if anyone has any questions right now, feel free to speak up.
Or type in the chat, like whatever you feel more comfortable.
So I see the one in there.
Yep, we have one here. Which areas do you think will be changed most for the free movement, or do you have any suggestions for the researcher to look at?
I definitely think that what we're going to see a big change in, of course, is the that storage distribution facility, right? We're seeing such an uptick in online purchases and requirements for delivery. And I know that I'm sure everyone is like me. I'll look at Amazon for that one thing I want to get. And if I can't have it tomorrow, I'm surprised, right? So there's a whole lot more of, we used to be accepting of having to go to a store and obtain this good. And then we got used to this idea of having online ordering available. Maybe it was a 5 to 7 day. And then Amazon came and, kind of ruined us all by giving us Prime as an option, right? So now we expect this product to be with us in 2 days or overnight or same day. So I think what Amazon and other online vendors are having to see is a whole lot more of their distribution happening on a more local level instead of being able to store it at one location. So that we're going to see a lot more of these facilities needing to be installed all over the place. I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think the roadways, a lot are already planned for this, and the DOT is well aware of the idea of while they're completing these streets, they're still being smart about these. They're not trying to put bike lanes in where you would have a lot of freight happening. So I don't think that we'll see a whole lot of change to the roadways necessarily. A lot of South Florida roadways are already widened, but if you head anywhere north, there's a lot more roadway widening to happen as you go further north in Florida, of course, right? There's a lot more build out to happen. So I think those are mostly what I anticipate. I'm envisioning long-term impact in trucking, but e-commerce has dramatically shortened trip lengths. I agree. Straight truck registrations are way up, but so are large truck registrations. Quite candidly, the Class 1 railroads are going to have to re-engineer their business models. Yes, absolutely. I think that we will definitely see that. I assume this question is saying that it's going to become a better option to ship it by truck than by train, right? So I can see that as well. It's been interesting, going to various Brightline. I did go to get, prior to the pandemic, I got to go to each of the station openings for Brightline. And a lot of their business model is not even based on their ridership, it's just based on their real estate, right? So they're anticipating making their money on the real estate that's associated with the train and not even the ridership necessarily. So not that Brightline was a freight facility in general either, but I think that that's kind of indicative of the trains as well.
So when you talked about the converting malls to senior living, do you know, are there any cases where people have applied this, or what exactly would be the motivation for this change? Because that is the first time that I heard about it.
I know, and I think when I heard about it from our director of planning, my head kind of exploded. Right, it's a pretty exciting idea to think about these buildings that are perfectly fine, right? Structurally, these buildings are fine. They just don't need the retail space anymore, and that was happening prior to the pandemic, right? Already, a lot of malls were seeing such a decrease. I'm sure it's of various factors, but we all know that online shopping is taken over, right? So a lot of these malls already were seeing such a reduction, but the idea of the first part of your question, I've got an article I can forward to you that from the American Planning Association that talks about these. I have not personally seen the conversion happen anywhere yet, but the idea of this existing building, structurally sound, has plenty of room for all of these and for being adapted. But then if you also consider it's surrounded by a wide open area, you won't need the parking lot anymore, right? Or you won't need all of it. You can readapt some of that parking lot to, putt-putt golf or walking garden areas for the folks living in the community. And just what is such a great idea for a structure that is perfectly adequate structurally. It just is no longer needed for its current use. And I see Heather shared the article in there for us. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather. I'll take a look at that. Seems interesting. The parking lots, converting parking lots to restaurants, I heard about it, but the shopping malls are new to me.
Yeah, yep, pretty neat idea.
Thank you. So any more questions? Well, if we don't have any more questions, we can just, we have one. So has there been much thought about how microfreight, Amazon vans, FedEx is or isn't affecting development requirements? In a condo complex or neighborhood streets, for example, the mall trucks and vans are coming and going. Wondering if there are studies about this.
The idea, when we're designing the roadways, we used to have to model the turning movements and moving on the roadway with like an 18-wheeler, right? We used to have to consider the WB vehicles. But a lot of our turning movement analyses and stuff now are more for these box trucks, right? We're not having to consider getting these into the facilities as much anymore, like a condo complex on A1A, for example, right? But we are having to consider that turning movement for those box vehicles to get in or out of that. We are seeing loading and drop-off zone requirements for our land development projects where you will have to accommodate those vehicles coming in. They can't just park on the outside lane of A1A, right, to happen and make a delivery anymore. That we are seeing them require some kind of loop area for land development that will allow for these trucks to come in. And then as far as studies, I am not aware about studies for that necessarily, but we are seeing that in the real world. As far as our land development projects, they are required to accommodate delivery vehicles like that. Not the large semis, but more of the box trucks and things, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right, if we don't have any more questions, I think we can finish early. Right, Valentina?
Yes. Aline, go ahead. I'll give you the floor to make some announcements from Fmri.
All right, so thank you all for joining us today and supporting our webinar series. Thank you, Lori, again for presenting to us. I also would like to thank Heather and Karina who helped us putting this event together, and Dr. Kaiser for the connections, and Valentina for the great effort to maintain the WTS FAU student chapter in these difficult times.